I want to talk about municipal bonds. Now, municipal bonds are issued by local, county, and state governments, and they're used to finance public interest projects such as bridges, roads, libraries, schools. Sometimes they'll buy up land and use it as a park, those sort of things. Now, the thing about municipal bonds in general is that they're tax-free from federal income tax. And oftentimes they're free of tax from the state that issued the bonds. So in order to do a comparison, we have to look at compare the tax-free municipal rate with the taxable interest rate. Now I'll do an example here, but I have actually a video that discusses this in a little more detail. So suppose a corporate bond has a rate of 8%. If your marginal tax rate is 28%, and by marginal tax rate we mean every extra dollar of earnings is taxed at 28%, what is your after-tax return on the bond? Well, it's 8% times 1 minus the marginal tax rate. That is, 28 cents out of every dollar goes to Uncle Sam, and that means that 72 cents out of every dollar you get to keep. So if we multiply, or 72% of that. So if we multiply 8% times 0.72, we get 5.76%. So if we were comparing this bond to the municipal bond rate, you would use this rate of 5.76% rather than 8%. So you don't want to look and say, well, that municipal bond only pays 6%, and the corporate rate is 8%, that's not a correct comparison. What you should do is compare the 5.76% to 6%. Because in the case of the corporate bond, you'd have to pay tax on this. Okay, another example. Suppose the rate on a corporate bond is 9% and the rate on a municipal bond is 6.75%. Which should you choose? So another way to figure out this problem is to say, at what marginal tax rate will I be indifferent between the two types of bonds? So here's the case where we say that you're getting 6.75% is the municipal rate, the tax-free rate, and 9% is the taxable rate. But the after-tax amount you're going to get is multiplied by 1 minus the marginal tax rate. So if we do a little algebra, and I've done most of the steps here, I multiply the 0.09 into the terms in the bracket. We rearrange terms, we'll find that the marginal tax rate here is 25%. That is, at a 25% tax rate, you'll be indifferent between the two bonds. If your rate is higher than 25%, then you would be better off buying the municipal bond. If it's lower than 25%, you'd be better off buying the taxable bond and just paying the tax on it. Another way to look at these types of problems is if you have a corporate bond and a municipal bond, is to figure out what the after-tax rate is for the corporate bond. That's kind of the example I showed when I showed how you did the calculation. So here, the municipal bond rate is 6.75%, but you can't compare it to 9% because this is going to be taxed and this is not. If your marginal tax rate is 28%, then your after-tax return is going to be 6.48%, which is lower than the municipal tax rate of 6.75%. So here's the case where you're going to take the municipal bond. All right, as far as municipal bonds are concerned, there are two types. There are general obligation bonds, which are backed by the credit and taxing power of the issuing jurisdiction. There are also revenue bonds that are backed by revenues from some project, like the tolls from a bridge or the tolls from a toll highway. Now, when you think about it, general obligation bonds are going to be less risky than revenue bonds. If a municipality, or let's say a state, builds a bridge and nobody uses it, there are going to be no revenues from that bond to pay off that bond. So that bond may be in default. But in the case of a general obligation bond, the town can, or the state can, raise taxes or use taxes to pay the obligation of the bonds. Now, politically, this may not be popular, but it certainly makes it less risky because there is an alternative to raising money that, while most of us don't like seeing our taxes raised, the legislators can do that. Now, keep in mind that municipal bonds are not default free. And one example is Orange County, California. In 1990, they defaulted, and their default amounted to $1.4 billion in the municipal bond market. This is a case that was quite famous because Orange County got involved in a lot of some derivative securities. These are very complicated securities. They thought they might park their money there and earn a better rate of return. They didn't actually understand them, and because market conditions changed, they lost a lot of money and therefore had to default on their bonds. In comparing general obligation bonds to revenue bonds, the next slide shows you from 1984 to 2009 general obligation bonds and revenue bonds. And you'll notice that the general obligation bonds represent a higher percentage in the latter part of the sample. So if you look at this, and it's a little bit hard to see these colors. I had to check out the book to make sure I knew which was which. The top ones are the general obligation bonds. The bottom part here in blue, and this is sort of a greenish color. Somebody should have picked somewhat different colors when they created this graph. These are the revenue bonds down here. So you can see that back in '84, the general obligation bonds were a very small part of the total bond issue. Okay, revenue bonds were quite a bit larger. They look to be 3 or 4 times higher. Here it looks to be in '09, not quite 50-50, maybe 60-40. So here maybe 25% general obligation bonds, here maybe 40-45% general obligation bonds. So general obligation bonds have been growing as a percentage. You can also see that in general, municipal debt has been growing over a number of years. It may have stabilized a little bit here, but it has been growing. So you can see that municipal bonds represent another market in the bond market. There's some unique features to them, such as the tax deductibility of interest, and also the fact that there are different kinds of bonds, revenue versus general obligation bonds.